Hello and welcome to the UiPath Introductory Training. In this lesson, we'll learn how to handle repetitive processes by making use of loops. Now let's start with a definition of that concept. Loops are structures most often used to automate repetitive tasks. Since repeating similar operations without making errors is a core function of automation and programming in general, loops are an essential element in most projects. In UiPath, there are a few methods for repeating certain tasks. The simplest is available in flowchart mode, and it involves connecting a certain point in our flowchart to an earlier execution point. And in sequence mode, there are looping containers that repeat the actions that are inside their body section. In our flowchart, let's say we want to start the process again when we haven't found a leap year. To do that, we'll just connect the end of this branch of the workflow to where we want the execution to resume. Now when the program reaches this message box, it will go to the start of the program and ask us again to input a number. But if the number is a leap year, the program chooses the true branch of the workflow and the execution will stop after the message box. As you can see, it's pretty easy to make a loop in a flowchart simply by connecting a wire to a previous execution point. Just make sure there's also an exit option out of the loop, otherwise your automation will be forever stuck in that loop. So, that's how looping works in flowchart mode. In a sequence, there are another couple of options, the do-while loops and for each. It's pretty clear that the while and do-while loops are almost the same thing. They work by repeating the set of actions in the body while the condition is true. The only difference between the two is the order in which the two elements are executed. For the while loop, if the condition is met, the set of actions in the body are executed. For the do-while loop, the actions are executed and then, if the condition is met, the actions are executed again. The for each loop is a bit different. It works by iterating through a list of items, one item at a time, and executing whatever actions are in the body of the action. But let's see some examples of all of this. Coming back to our sequence leap year workflow, let's modify this example to repeatedly ask for a number until you enter a leap year, or a number that's a multiple of 4. We already have most of it. We just want to repeat it until we get it right. So all we have to do is put all of this inside a do-while loop, and we're done. So let's drag one inside the sequence, doesn't really matter where, and then move the two existing actions inside the loop. Now you can select both of them using the Control key. The do-while block got a bit bigger to accommodate the new actions, but it's still the same. Now we just need to enter a condition for when this whole sequence will execute again, and that will be when our year variable is not a multiple of 4. So, we'll just copy the condition from the if statement and use the for while condition and change it to be not equal. By the way, this is the symbol for not equal. So, now when we run the workflow, the process stops only when we enter a leap year. In our case, the do-while action was preferable. But other situations might require the other while loop with a condition before the action. Right, I guess that's all pretty straightforward. So let's take a quick look at the for each loop we mentioned earlier. We'll use it to cycle through all the files in a chosen folder and print out their name one by one. Easy enough. In practice, you would probably do more advanced stuff than simply printing their name, but now we're just testing the for each loop. We'll start by adding a new sequence, read folders, in the master workflow. And inside it, add a select folder action. It's just an input dialog that will let us choose a specific folder and create a new output variable by right-clicking and choosing Create Variable. We'll name it Selected Folder. Then we'll drop in an Assign action. On the left, create a new variable called Files List. We want to get a list of files, and there's a special command for that, directory.getFiles, and the folder's path as a parameter. In our case, we'll just use the one generated by the select folder action. We're using the VB.NET language because UiPath is built on the .NET framework. We'll discuss the ways of finding additional methods like this one later in the video. Because the getFiles command generates a list or an array of files, the type of the variable must be array of strings. Finally, add the for each loop and fill in the list with our list of files. This way, for each item in our list, we'll do some action, in this case, a simple write line for each individual item. As you can see in the properties section, the for each loop also accepts an index parameter. We can use this to store the iteration number of the loop. Let's create a new variable called index to store that value. Let's also add a new write line activity to display the iteration number of the for each loop. Now it looks like there are validation errors here. Let's hover over the icon to read the error message for the first one. The reason is this. Write line expects a string as its input, but item is of the object type. Alright, let's take a look at the argument type in the properties panel of the for each activity. We need to iterate through an array of strings, so let's select the suitable argument type, which is string. Now there's another way of dealing with this error. Instead of changing the argument type from generic value to string, we can simply add .toString after the argument name in the write line activity. Now there are several methods that can be used with generic value type variables, regardless of their underlying primitive data type. UiPath does its best to work out how we intend to make use of the data, and we'll see how UiPath handles generic values later in a practice exercise. The second write line activity also displays an error. The index variable must also be converted to string in order to display it correctly. So we will just call the toString method on it. Regardless of which variable type we set, if we run the automation, it will first ask us to select the folder, then UiPath will read that folder, and using this .NET piece of code, it will give us a list of files. And we store this list in our variable named simply fileslist. And then this loop will go through each item in the list, which in our case is a file path, and print it to the output window. It will also display the file indexes in the loop. And here they are. Alright, in this lesson we talked about the various types of loops, and then we touched on variable type management. In the next video, we will undertake a practical exercise that covers the entire information presented in the tutorials so far. Thank you for watching.